Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're just waiting as people kind of filter in from the waiting room. All right, so I think we can get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for part 3 of our 3-part series supporting EPA's Vacant to Vibrant initiative, also called V2V for shorthand. I'm Devin Rainwater, Program Associate with the Center for Creative Land Recycling, also known as CCLR. And our webinar today is titled Looking Back to Move Forward, Brownfield Cases to Celebrate and Study. As the title suggests, we will hear about some land reuse successes today in order to recognize the milestones that can be reached well before a brownfields project is complete. So next slide. So on today's agenda, you'll see that we have a list of case studies to explore. I'll start off with an introduction of our story today, and then I'll pass it over to our speakers to share their presentations. I want to let you know after each speaker's presentation, we'll have 5 minutes for Q&A for that presentation. As always, you can put your comments and questions in the chat, which we can read out during Q&A, or you can raise your hand and I'll ask you to unmute to share your question with the speaker. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a question for you where we'll open the floor for you to share any case studies or land reuse successes from your own community, or if you have any goals or milestones that you'd like to reach in your community. Next slide. So because the Vacant to Vibrant program is the driving force behind this webinar series, I would like to remind everyone what we're all about. The Center for Creative Land Recycling is partnering with the EPA to carry out this initiative, which is an opportunity to connect with the communities that we have not worked with in the past or have not utilized brownfields funding or do not have a brownfields program in their community. So with a focus on historically underserved communities and populations that are facing environmental justice issues, we're looking to meet with you one-on-one to hear about any issues that you're facing in your community. We want to work with you and hear your stories in order to assist you in reaching your goals. Next slide. So during our last webinar, webinar 2, we spoke about the 4 Ps that make a successful land reuse project, including partnerships, planning, properties, and productive reuse. I want to remind you all that CCLR and EPA are your partners throughout each of these steps, and we have programs and tools to assist you in achieving success in your communities. So a reminder to check out webinar 2 if you missed it, and you can hear a lot more about each of these components. But today we'll be exploring examples of the ways that interim success happens in each of these categories. Interim successes can include achievements from completing a brownfields inventory and gaining local board approval, gaining property access, completing a phase 1 or 2, establishing a funding source, all the way to actual groundbreaking and starting the development for your reuse. Next slide. So I'd now like to introduce you to our speakers today. We have Elizabeth Zima joining us from the city of Phoenix, Amy Barnes of the Northern Nevada Development Authority, and Joshua Silver joining us to discuss the India Basin Waterfront Project in San Francisco. So as a reminder, we'll have a 5-minute Q&A session at the end of each presentation instead of a general Q&A at the end of the webinar. So with that, we can go to the next slide and Elizabeth can start us off.
Thank you, Devin. My name is Beth Zima. I'm an environmental quality specialist at the City of Phoenix in the Environmental Programs Department. I've been the technical manager for the last 2 assessments grants that we've had. And I'm going to talk to you today about 3 sites that we've had at the City of Phoenix. So, so we can kind of go through some of the steps that led to the redevelopment and some of the partnerships that were put in place. Next slide.
Then click save.
So the city of Phoenix has a pretty mature brownfields program. My colleague, Roseanne Albright, has been working on brownfield sites since 1998. And we've had a variety of EPA grants totaling almost $4 million. Next slide. Okay, so the first site I wanted to talk about is the East Washington Fluff site. So you can see the picture on the upper left is it's auto shredder fluff. And you can see that at the surface of the site. In the background, you can kind of see some of the high rises, and in the middle is the baseball field. So this is just south of our downtown area, so not too far outside the urban core. And in the lower left-hand corner, you can see kind of an intermediate stage for the site where some of the contamination was removed and a cap was installed. And then on the right is the final end product development. It's a commercial warehouse development. Next slide. So how did it get here? So it all started in 1986 when the former auto shredder site was abandoned by the owner. So they just walked away. And so in 1998, Phoenix decided that we were going to make this our #1 brownfield priority. So the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, ADQ, they'd already recognized that there was contamination on the site and had put up a fence around the site. But there were still holes in the fences and homeless were living on the site. So we decided that that was a site that, and it was also contributing quite a bit of blight to the community. So we decided that was going to be a priority for us. But the limitation of being a municipality is we were neither the site owner nor a regulator. And so that's where partnerships are just so important. So we worked with, approached ADQ about the site. You know, I mean, they're looking at a whole state. So, you know, you have to be an advocate to help get extra resources to your priority sites. So we went to DEQ and they were able to, by 1999, which is extraordinarily fast, list the site on their WRF registry, which is our state equivalent of Superfund site. And once the site was listed, that allowed us, allowed ADQ to bring resources to develop the site. So they were able to remove some of the waste and install a protective cap. And then it sat vacant kind of in that intermediate site you saw in the previous slide until 2006, when Maricopa County auctioned the site off and Harrison Properties purchased the site. But we all know what happened shortly after 2006. There was the economic downturn of 2008. So it sat vacant for a little while longer. And then finally, when the economic conditions were right, Harrison started development in 2014, and by 2017 it had the final development. So who are some of the partners that we coordinated with as this site moved to development? EPA was involved doing environmental investigation, providing technical resources. We had the Arizona Department of Health Services that declared the site a public health risk. And sometimes bad news is good news because it really does emphasize the importance of getting that site cleaned up. The Arizona Department of Environmental Quality was hugely helpful. They provided millions of dollars in cleanup. And they're still involved today because not all the contamination was removed, it was capped. So they'll still be doing yearly checkups to make sure that the cap is maintained. Maricopa County, there were taxes that were due on the property since it was abandoned since 1986. There were all those back taxes building up, and they did a brownfields tax abatement that allowed them to waive the back taxes to make it to incentivize someone to purchase the site. And then the city of Phoenix was in the background being the champion. We also supported the development with our City of Phoenix brownfield bond funds, which are our own city funds that we could use for developers that are developing public infrastructure. So streets or water lines on their development, we can help support that part of the development. Next slide. This is a really cool site that we were happy to be able to support. It's called Spaces of Opportunity. So on the left, you can see the site was just vacant land with some end dump soil on the western side. And the aerial photo on the right is what the development looks like now. It's an area of urban agriculture. They have community gardens. They have native species monarch gardens. They've got a farmer's market that comes every week. And they also do cooking and gardening demonstrations. And they focus on indigenous cooking and farming practices when they do some of their educational components. And you can see all the residential properties around the site. So this is a huge benefit to the community for a site that was vacant and underutilized previously. So we were able to support them by doing a phase 1 and phase 2 during our EPA Brownfields to Health Fields assessment grant. And we also provided them some of that City of Phoenix brownfields bond money that I mentioned in the previous site. And then they were also able to obtain philanthropic funding, and the site was actually owned by the local school district, and the school district was willing to lease it to them because they didn't have a current use. Next slide. The next site is the Arizona Fresh, also known as our Del Rio landfill. The advantage to this site, for better or for worse, is that we own it. It's a landfill that the City of Phoenix owned and operated in the 60s and 70s. The aerial on the left is what it currently looks like. We have an agreement in place with Arizona Fresh that's been signed, and they're planning to break ground this year. And then the development on the photo on the right is the conceptual development. And so this site is going to include a farmer's market, a produce distribution hub. They're going to develop a park that has gathering spaces and walking paths. And then in the later phases, they're going to have an urban agricultural innovation center and some office space for partners. Next slide.
Agreed. Yeah, and I was gonna start adding it.
And so there were a lot of partnerships that allowed this development to occur. But one of the things that really helped is that because we own the site, we were able to control a little more what kind of development occurred. And so we did an RFP, and we were really looking for equitable development. You know, we wanted to make sure that there was an open space component. We were favorable for food assets, and we had a few different submittals for the RFP, but Arizona Fresh aligned with our vision the best, so they were the one that was selected to develop the site. Our champion for the site is really the Phoenix Economic Development Department. They've been pushing to develop the site for literally decades, and they've really moved the site along, and we're excited about the development that's going to happen. There's layered funding. Of course, Arizona Fresh also partnered with philanthropic organizations. We were able to utilize an EPA area-wide planning grant for this site. And some of the elements that were determined for park spaces during that area-wide planning grant are going to be incorporated into the park and open spaces that Arizona Fresh will develop. But I just want to add a note that this site was not eligible for assessment or cleanup grants because the city is the responsible party. So there were limitations in what grants we could use for the site.
You're welcome.
And just as another note for partnerships, Arizona Fresh will be partnering with ASU and the University of Arizona for urban agricultural innovation elements, which is pretty exciting. Next slide. And then just some last thoughts about this site. It's not so much what was approved or not approved for site. The point of the slide is that when you're planning ahead, you really have to think about your site and what are the environmental conditions of the site, and not every development is right for every site. So if you have like a heavily contaminated site, you may not want to be looking at urban ag. If here where we have a landfill, there's some water use intensive uses that we don't want to encourage. Next slide. And then one last thought is sometimes plans change. So this site had previous development concepts. Between 1978 and 2003, we did a ton of environmental studies, and they were all directed towards using it as a golf course. And in 2008, We looked at possibly developing a park and sports complex, and we did some environmental studies. So just remember that, you know, it's not always the first development that works out. And a lot of the information that you gain while you're investigating for a certain development can be used for the next one. And what's important is moving the site forward. Thank you. And this is my contact information and our brownfields program coordinators information, if you have any questions or want to follow up later.
Either way's fine.
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that presentation. We can now take 5 minutes to field some questions. I haven't seen any in the chat. I haven't seen any in the chat yet, but if you have any questions that you would like to share verbally, you know, you can go ahead and raise your hand in Zoom, and I can call on you to unmute. And while we're waiting for questions, Elizabeth, oh, I see a question in the chat. Will the presentation be shared? Yes, it will be. So the slide presentation will be shared, and we also have a recording that will be shared after the presentation. So Elizabeth, a question I have for you, I saw you said that your champion for the Arizona Fresh project was the Phoenix Economic Development. So how did you go about engaging with them and finding your champion and working with them?
Well, I mean, we didn't really, I mean, they are kind of, their job is to look for large parcels of land and see what they can do to develop them. So I think we had a mutual interest in this scenario. Like, we didn't have to bring this site to them. They were already interested in this site, and especially the city-owned sites. We frequently will do RFPs, and we're look for specific types of development.
Thank you. Also, I see a question in the chat. Please elaborate eligibility challenges for landfills.
Oh, okay. You're probably talking about so this is a problem that a lot of communities have, is municipalities or counties. If you've run your own landfill in the past, then you're the one that created the landfill. So like so the city of Phoenix owned and operated this landfill. So we're the responsible party. We're the one that created that condition. And so assessment and cleanup money cannot go to responsible parties. But if there's a landfill, like it was an old gravel pit and it got filled with landfill debris by a private entity, and then you bought that property, you would be eligible for assessment and cleanup grants. But as the owner and operator, we are not. And that's a frequent problem for communities.
Got it. Thank you. And another question. Oh,
actually, I'm going to add one more thing.
Yeah.
EPA does have there are some technical assistance grants that EPA has that can assist with that. So make sure you talk with EPA or your technical assistance person to see if there are any options.
Absolutely. Yeah. C-Clear is here as a technical assistance provider, and Noemi is also here with us today at this webinar, sharing information in the chat. A question from Sheila on the Health Fields Assessment Fund project. What was the agreement with the school district?
Okay, so we didn't have a direct agreement with the school district. We worked on behalf of Spaces of Opportunity, but we did require Spaces to get a access agreement signed between the school district and allowing the city of Phoenix to do assessment activities on the property.
Great, thank you. I don't see any more questions right now. Noemi did let everyone know the technical assistance is available via the Region 9 Targeted Brownfields Assessment Program. Thank you, Noemi. If there are no more questions now, a reminder that Elizabeth's contact information is available in the chat and will be sent out via these slides after the presentation. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing this information with us today. And so we can move on to Amy Barnes of the Northern Nevada Development Authority. Go ahead, Amy.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Amy Barnes. I'm the Director of Business Development, as well as the Brownfield Coordinator for Northern Nevada Development Authority. We serve as a regional development authority for 5 counties here in Northern Nevada, which we have lovingly called the Sierra region, which includes Carson City, Douglas, Mineral, Lyon, and Story counties. We've had a total of 4 brownfield grants from EPA and have launched a certified site program for our region. Next slide. Okay, so here we have the William Pennington Life Center. NNDA worked closely with Churchill County to identify the desire to fulfill the need of the community by means of a senior center. What was once a dilapidated gas station is now the William N. Pennington Life Center in Fallon, Nevada. NNDA used $45,000 of our brownfield grant money to assess the property that was thought to have contamination due to the age of the gas station. After completing the phase 1, it was determined that a phase 2 was needed, where groundwater contamination was found. Churchill County partnered with NDEP, which is the Northern Nevada Department of Environmental Protection and EPA to contract with Converse Consultants to use the state brownfields funds to conduct the sampling required for monitoring the site. Ultimately, it was determined that no further action was required. The William Pennington Life Center opened in 2017, and they are a senior center served in supporting seniors and their families, friends, and caregivers. The facility provides health services, homemaker services, a dining room, activities, and a hair salon for seniors and their families, as well as being a home base for Meals on Wheels, which feeds 180 families a day. Next slide. This is our Victory Logistics site that was, that's 4,300 acres. A little background on this site. With the growth happening just over the county line in Story County, NNDA had to analyze where the next growth spurt and industrial opportunities would be likely in our region. After identifying the Crossroads site in Fernley, Nevada, NNDA and Converse Consultants met with the property owner, Mr. Joe Wade, and his realtor, Brian Armin, with the intent of completing a certified site to market the property. NNDA completed a phase 1 for the Crossroads Commerce Center. No environmental issues were identified. NNDA completed 2 draft certified site packets for the owner, Mr. Wade. 1 certified site packet was completed for Crossroads South and 1 for Crossroads North. Upon review, the NNDA's certified site review panel, it was decided that only Crossroads South would be certified. The review panel felt that Crossroads North was lacking in the necessary infrastructure to meet the certification criteria. The certification of Crossroads South still included a substantial acreage. In total, 2,153 acres was certified. This acreage counted for 25% of the total EPA reuse acreage in 2018, and the EPA project manager called to ask if there was a mistake that was made. NNDA was happy to confirm that to the EPA that the totals were in fact accurate and the potential for a major reuse success story had been accomplished. The first major development to occur on the site where it was certified was the Polaris Distribution Center, which is here pictured here. Polaris Industries purchased 37 acres of the Crossroads Commerce Center to build a 475,000 square foot distribution facility. The total investment for the project was just under $48 million, with the creation of 64 jobs. In 2019, we were contacted by an institutional investor working for Mark IV Capital and interested in the potential land deal at the Crossroads Commerce Center. He had many questions regarding the certified site packet, verifying the certified site packet's information and fact finding. It is our understanding that the certified site packet was instrumental in the sale of the entire Crossroads Commerce Center, both Crossroads North and South, to Mark IV Capital at the cost of $45 million. Crossroads Commerce Center was subsequently rebranded as the Victory Logistics District. Mark IV Capital plans to include a 4,300 acre commercial and industrial park with an estimated potential of 10,000 direct and indirect jobs. The first project that has been completed in Victory Logistics is the first building to be constructed. It is 800,000 square foot industrial commercial space with 40-foot clear ceiling heights. The building has been leased to Redwood Materials as a warehouse for the logistics facility. And that is all I have, short, sweet, and to the point.
That's great. Thank you, Amy. And there's Amy's contact information for anyone to get in contact with Amy. Thank you so much for your presentation. So now we can go into our 5 minutes question and answers section. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or raise your hand and I can call on you to unmute. While we're waiting for questions for Amy, I saw that I missed a question from Erica Miller while we were taking questions for Beth. So I would like to pose this question to both of you. What is the best way to get started if you're owning a large piece of land? Amy or Beth, if you have an answer, yeah.
We can put clickable links.
So if you are actually the owner of the property, I would suggest talking to your brownfield coordinator in the area to verify that it would be a good fit for the grant. Not every project is a good fit for the grant. Sometimes we get questions that just want to use the grant just to be able to sell the property when there is no development plans either by the county or the future owners of the property. And that's not always a good fit of the brownfield funds.
Join. We didn't put the Zoom
And
link.
I'll add that
More information.
really the first step is always the phase one. If you own the property,
We're not.
hopefully you had a phase one done at the time you purchased the property. If it's something that you've had historically forever, then whether you get grant money or not, you always want to start with a phase one to find out what kind of environmental conditions you might have to deal with.
That's great. Thank you. If there's any more questions in the chat, I don't see any now, but go ahead, put your questions there. In the meantime, I do have a question, kind of what are the best ways to engage the community during projects like this?
David, is that for me?
Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
So we work really closely with our cities, counties, and municipalities on what is the master plan for that area. What do we see in our region? What makes sense for the lifestyle that here in Northern Nevada that we all want to harbor. So it's having that one-on-one relationship and being able to have that candid area because being that I serve 5 counties, just because I think it'd be a good fit and it would make sense for something to go in one area, that next county may have a different plan. So it's just making sure that we have open and honest communication about the expectations for each property.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. So I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat or any raised hands. So as a reminder, our speakers' contact information is on the slides that'll get sent out. But I think we can continue on and I'll now introduce Josh Silver from the India Basin Waterfront Project. Josh, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thank you. All right, well, from 5 counties to 1 city to 1 neighborhood to 1 park. Hi, everybody. My name is Josh Silver. I'm a program manager with the San Francisco Recreation and Parks Department. Thank you, C Clear, and to Jean and Devin for the invitation. And it's nice to join you, Elizabeth and Amy, today on this webinar. You can go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to just start off a little bit about the partnership structure for the India Basin Waterfront Park project, and then talk a little bit about kind of some of the design components, as well as something that is really vital to this, which is our Equitable Development Plan. And if you hear me say EDP, that is the acronym for, I'm programmed to say EDP and not Equitable Development Plan, but I hope you do know what I mean. So the partnership structure is a four-way partnership structure with the city, myself, and our department, the San Francisco Recreation and Parks Department, along with the Trust for Public Land, which is, of course, a national nonprofit organization. The San Francisco Parks Alliance, a local San Francisco Parks nonprofit, and the A. Philip Randolph Institute, which is a community-based organization that is located within the Bayview Hunters Point community where this park project is occurring. Next slide, please. A little bit about a little bit of overview about where the park is. This is in the southeastern part of San Francisco on the San Francisco Bay. I do want to say that this project is really about reuse, it's about renewal, it's about resilience, and it's about placekeeping. So as you sort of listen to this presentation and hear about the Equitable Development Plan, and you hear about some of the construction and design features of it, I want you to think of those things: the reuse, the renewal, the resilience, and placekeeping. So as I said, for those of you that are less familiar with San Francisco, sort of the yellow blob on the map will orient you to where we are. Of course, the bridge is the San Francisco Oakland Bay Bridge just above it. And then we are down, some of you might know where the San Francisco Giants used to play at Candlestick Park. This project is in the heart of the Bayview Hunters Point community, and it is really the goal of this waterfront park project is to provide a transformational outdoor space and waterfront access to the residents of this historically neglected neighborhood. And the main part of the project pairs an underperforming park, which is currently India Basin Shoreline Park, with a new parcel that my department acquired in 2011 to create a 10-acre park. And the park will really form the core of 64 acres of open space consisting of a series of public and private parcels along San Francisco's southeastern waterfront. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the EDP, and you can see some of the goals. I will not read all those goals to you, but those are kind of the key goals from the Equitable Development Plan. But what I will highlight here are these 6 areas of focus. And each area of focus includes specific strategies as well as initiatives for implementation. And what this plan was, how this plan was developed, it was developed with the 4 partners that I mentioned, but with the community. And not only the community, but a leadership committee that is comprised of community members, from whether it's a business owner to an individual resident or a representative of a community-based organization. They literally and figuratively helped us develop and write the Equitable Development Plan goals, including all the way down to like line editing some of the word choices in the document. So this is something that is very rooted in the community, and it connects itself to the design, to the construction, and the sort of the future of the park. Next slide, please. Some priorities for the park development. So the park design process was an intensive community engagement that dated back all the way to 2010, actually. It's featured more than 100 community meetings, workshops, and presentations. And again, to underscore, emphasize that this happened to ensure the project was really developed with the community. Some of you might know of, or you probably know of, the Presidio, and there's a brand new park in the Presidio that opened last year called the Tunnel Tops. It's a beautiful park if you haven't been to it, and it's similar in scale and scope to the India Basin Waterfront Park project. But that space was designed really to give urbanites a national park experience. And that park was designed to provide lots of opportunities to sit and relax in nature. Whereas this park, the India Basin Waterfront Park, is more directly connected to the desires, the goals, the values, and the aspirations of the Bayview Hunters Point community. And by way of these 100 plus meetings that we've had, we learned from the community that residents really wanted an especially active park with lots of recreational amenities and community spaces for play and exercise. sports courts, and importantly, access to the shoreline for things like boating and fishing. So the goal of the project for the partners in the community is really to deliver sort of miles of winding shoreline and trails, acres of restored tidal landscape, an abundance of recreation opportunities, all in Bayview Hunters Point's front porch of the community. There's also, in a sort of historic moment for environmental justice in the community, the India Basin Waterfront Project will transform a dilapidated relic of industrial shipwrights era into a 21st century park that will emphasize the public access around social equity, resilience, and restoration. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the project schedule. This is a 3-phase project. The remediation of the project occurred in 2021 and wrapped up last summer. And thank you to the Environmental Protection Agency for helping provide guidance, but also financial support to enable this pretty intensive remediation that needed to occur at the site. So phase 1 was about the removal and remediation of industrial chemicals on the former what is 900 Innes, which is an address, which is this parcel that I mentioned earlier that the city acquired. And then phase 2, which we started in September, October of last year, is the actual construction in delivering on the design of the park and the park spaces. And I'll give you a few examples of what that entails. We expect to have that completed about a year from now. You're all invited to come out and experience the park when it's done, at which point then we will pivot to the existing park, which is India Basin Shoreline Park, start construction there next summer, and that'll be about a 2-year process. And the map on the bottom left can kind of orient you to phase 1, 2, and 3, and kind of how this park, as I mentioned, sort of fits within the core of expanding the 64 acres of open green space and park space in the community. Next slide, please. Just a couple things to highlight about the park and the construction. So on your left is the phase 1 and phase 2, the remediation site, as well as where we've broken ground. This is more of the kind of programmatic components of the park. This includes the Shipwrights Cottage, which is a historic landmark in the city, which is going through rehabilitation as we speak, which will serve as a community space in the lower level, but the upper level will be the welcome or kind of visitor center to the park, kind of the gateway to the park. There'll be a food pavilion for which we are working by way of the Equitable Development Plan to recruit a business from within the community that will serve as the concessionaire and operate kind of the food components. We have a maker type space that's a flex space for events, but also where we will be doing very intensive programming and partnering with our recreation department and other community-based organizations to utilize the space or feature public art, for example. And then the boating pieces, as I mentioned, the community really wanted a boating component. And so we've added a kayak launch and a kayak facility that's there. And then if you look over to the right of the screen, that is the phase 3. That is more of the active recreation. You see the expansive green space, the basketball courts. There is a trail, a small bay trail connection for running and walking. It's that more active kind of space that I mentioned. Next slide, please. So a few things about remediation. This was right when we started the remediation. And as you can see, there is a large water barrier. This is a tidal area. It was a very complicated decontamination and cleanup process that had to occur. There was a lot of in-water work that needed to happen as well. A lot of compliance with federal and or state laws around decontamination, a lot of monitoring. And so this is just to kind of give you the scale of the cleanup that had to occur there. And you will see on the top, there's a small houseboat, and people always ask, does somebody live on that? And yes, that is somebody's home and they live on that. So they had a very unique perspective of this whole project, both in the past and then the present, and they will into the future. Next slide. Just to kind of show remediation again, a little bit about the before, during, and after. And the after, of course, showing the clean site. And this was just before construction started. Next slide, please. We even had the EPA Deputy Administrator come visit us, Janet McCabe from Washington, D.C., as well as the EPA's Regional Director, Martha Guzman, A number of their staff came out to learn more about the project as a best practice for sharing through their networks. And so it was a really wonderful opportunity. On the left picture is our general manager with his hands up, Phil Ginsberg, who will stop you on the street and talk to you about this project. And you can just see by his animation how much he loves and cares about this project. But it was a really wonderful opportunity to have the EPA come out and spend some time with us. Next slide, please. Just quickly about park construction. As I mentioned, this is a complicated site due to it being on the waterfront, due to some of the requirements around CEQA and other state and local requirements around environmental protection. There were 84 piles that we had to install both in the water for some of the marine components and the decking for this, but also in the areas of the site that had been decontaminated. The work that had to occur was just, again, extensive and very detailed. And in fact, we even had to make a quick design pivot because when we were doing some of the in-water work, we discovered some ship ruins underwater, as this was the former decommissioned, Hunters Point was the decommissioned naval shipyard in the past. So we're sort of always getting things thrown at us with this project. With all that being said, we are on schedule to complete this construction in the spring of 2024. Next slide, please. Just a couple more quick things about construction. The Shipwrights Cottage that you've heard me mention a couple times now is that image on the right. It's going through, a painstaking rehabilitation, but it will be a real gem. And as I said, the Welcome Center. Next slide, please. And just to kind of wrap things up here a little bit with a couple more slides, a few more things about our equitable development plan, just to give you kind of a few highlights of some of the things that we are implementing as project partners, as well as with the community. The top left image on your screen is from Black History Month, where we did a community storytelling exercise to collect stories from Bayview Hunters Point perspectives, from looking backwards and the present and sort of their aspiration and hopes for the future, for which we will feature some of these stories in that visitor center as part of our interpretation, as well as on the interpretive sign program that will be a permanent fixture throughout both of the parks, or the park when it's done. The right image on the top is our workforce development. We are hiring from within the community to train, prepare, reduce barriers, and train individuals from the community to actually work on the project, which is already happening, and then to be indentured into a union to have well-paying permanent jobs that will continue on in other aspects of the project, including potentially looking at working in our gardening program, or helping be a maintenance or steward of the park as a permanent employee of the Parks Department. The bottom left is something that was developed with a local artist and youth in the community. It added color and vibrancy to what was just a plain basketball court. The two shipping containers you see in that same image are a community innovation lab, where we're offering a number of different types of programming, from financial literacy to music to arts programming. And then on the right is our swim and splash program that we're working with the YMCA to train and educate water safety. We're building a park on the water. And this is water safety and swimming lessons for Bayview Hunters Point youth to make them feel comfortable around water. Next slide, please. Last slide, quickly, about budget and fundraising. This is a $200 million project. $15 million we are investing back into the community by way of the EDP. We are really, grateful for the public funding that we've received from the EPA, from the state and the governor's office, to our city and county of San Francisco, and then of course through private donations. And so we have funded the remediation, we have funded all of the design for all phases, construction for phase 2, and we are nearing our goal to fund fully the construction for phase 3, which is looking out a year from now. Next slide, please. So with that, I want to say thank you for the opportunity again to speak today. I encourage you to go to ibwaterfrontparks.com to see the Equitable Development Plan. There's some videos and some more information about the project and project partners. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Josh, for joining us and sharing this wonderful presentation on India Basin. I really appreciate it. And it's a lot of information. and really interesting to learn about. Okay, so checking the chat for questions, as usual, from Cheryl, she says, thank you, Joshua. Great project. I'm interested in a couple areas of this project. There's 2 questions here, so I'll start with the first. What were the 3 major barriers in getting the project completed since it took over 10 years?
3 major barriers. Well, I would say, this has been something that the community has really kind of galvanized around in something that they've wanted. And I would say one of them was really about acquisition of, the 900 Innes property. And I would actually say the other, it's not so much a barrier, but something that was really about kind of the community engagement component of this. Like, anytime, of course, we take on a park project, whether we acquire or we're modernizing a recreation center, a new park, there's obviously extensive community engagement that goes into that. But we quickly realized that because we had, we wanted to develop this equitable development plan, that we needed to kind of go engagement enhanced or engagement plus. And so it was less of a barrier, but more about being kind of strategic about how we engage the community, when we engage the community, how we continuously were creating pathways for their input into this. And so it was just something that I think took a little bit more time than we had anticipated. We needed to make some moves and some pivots. So it's kind of like, it's not 3, I would say it's more like kind of 2, but those are really the 2 that are heart of it. It was acquisition and then kind of the community engagement piece that we needed to kind of rethink and kind of sort of figure out a different approach as we embarked on the design component of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of going along with that community engagement piece, Cheryl's second question is, was there a concern with green gentrification with the project? So as you're hearing from the community what they want to see and creating these great programs, was there anything done in terms of preventing green gentrification? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I mean, good question. Thank you for that. And then the actual plan itself, if you go to the Equitable Development Plan, there's a section in the plan that calls that out. And the Equitable Development Plan, it wasn't late to the game or the party, but the design process for this, the community's aspirations for a park, and then the actual design process started, ahead of us developing an equitable development plan. And so as in turn and hearing from the community about those concerns about displacement and green gentrification, the equitable development plan was a response to those things. And that's why we work so closely with the community to ensure not only are they just being heard, but they're actually seeing their input and their comments and their feedback into this plan. And then we are continuously working with them now to help implement those strategies to hopefully ensure that green displacement piece doesn't happen, or we're able to mitigate it if it does.
Yeah, thank you. Another question in the chat from Yi, beyond EDP, were there other hiring requirements from public funders, i.e. local and minority hiring?
Yeah, so the workforce development piece that I mentioned is a partnership that we have with our community-based partner, the A. Philip Randolph Institute, but also with the San Francisco Office of Economic and Workforce Development. And there's a program that is within that office called City Build, and it's a program that prioritizes the training, engagement, training, barrier removal, as I said during the presentation, for minority communities and others. So it's a program that we are partnering with in trying to attempt to address some of those things. There was also some contracting things as well related to the design and the construction too. I should add that was important in terms of how we put out our request for proposals for the construction piece of this as well.
Great, thank you, Josh. I don't see any more questions. I don't see any raised hands, and I don't see any more questions in the chat. But of course, Josh's contact information is available, so you can reach out to him directly. For the sake of time, I'll move on with our presentation. Thank you so much, Josh, and to Beth and Amy for joining us today and sharing the successes in your great projects. So we can move on to the next slide. I'll take a second to speak about the Center for Creative Land Recycling. Hopefully, after hearing from me about CClear on our past 2 webinars, you know a bit about what we do. But I just put our mission statement here for reference, and I'll remind you that we are EPA's technical assistance to brownfields provider, also known as TAB, and we are partnering with them in the Vacant to Vibrant initiative to reach communities. So today, I would also like to emphasize the opportunity that you have with CClear to achieve and to celebrate your interim successes. We can be a link to partners, and we provide technical assistance to assist you in reaching the milestones and your goals. So we can also uplift your story in our newsletter through a spotlight on our website or as a news item or a blog post. And we look forward to hearing you share your stories with us. Next slide. So you can reach out to me directly at my email on this slide, or you can schedule a meeting with the Vacant to Vibrant team through Calendly. And you can also find us at the National Brownfields Conference in August and the California Land Recycling Conference in September. I highly encourage you to schedule a one-on-one meeting with us through Calendly. We would love to meet with you there. Okay, so next slide. So taking a look at our key takeaways, reaching milestones within your project has been a huge focus today. So as a reminder and review, work with your communities and with stakeholders to envision their land reuse goals, work with your peers, and as always, ask for assistance. There's so much assistance available to you within CClear and EPA. And also celebrate your successes with us. Interim successes by definition happen along the way in the interim, and recognizing the value of a project as you go along through the process, I think is key in its longevity. So next slide. We have a little less than 10 minutes left in our webinar today, and I have a question for you in the audience. If you have a case study that you would like to share from your community, you can raise your hand, unmute, or share your stories in the chat. If you have a success or a milestone that you would like to share, or if you have a goal of a milestone for your community or your land reuse project. If you don't have one ready today, or if we don't get to your story, please email me at my email that's on the slide, and I would love to follow up with you and hear more. So yeah, we'll take that time now. I'm not seeing any immediate hands raised or anything in the chat. But yes, there's my email in the chat now. So I think if we don't have any immediate rush to share anything from yourself, we do have an example that Brooklyn James can share of kind of an interim success in a case study. Brooklyn, if you would like to share your example.
Sure. Okay. So one example of an interim success story is with the LA River, the G2 parcel or Taylor Yard. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that. So the LA River project, it's a huge project that encompasses more than just this G2 Taylor Yard parcel, but that's kind of the main one we're going to focus on because that's where EPA has really kind of helped out with some of the funding for the cleanup and assessments and stuff like that. So on the left is sort of a sky view of the LA River from above. So you could see it's pretty vacant, not much is there. And on the right is a preliminary design option, one of 3 that the city of LA has proposed for the reuse of the area. So the overall goals of this project are really to create a long stretch, about 52 miles of connected open space that's along the LA River. So this isn't just the city of LA working on this. You have multiple projects kind of all combined into one. So you have the Taylor Yard G2 River Park project, the 100 Acres Partnership project, Paseo del Rio, and they have a whole bunch of partners working together to kind of get these goals completed. So more goals of the project are to build support facilities along the river, have a trail that is a continuous path along the entire river, create some access points that are welcoming for people to get up close to the water and enjoy it, increase safe transportation to the river. And they're also working on doing some habitat and ecosystem restoration, and just allowing more space for that to function along the river corridor and kind of using it as a living laboratory and work on it in that way. And just connect those habitats with patches of green and corridors that will support wildlife and things like that. So I just kind of wanted to touch on a few of the resources that the city of LA and other partners were able to layer together to work towards these goals of the project. These are only some of the things that EPA and the state have provided, but there are several other state and federal resources that are going into the cleanup and also the redevelopment part of this project. So I'll start on the top left. We have the EPA cleanup grant. So the city of LA has multiple cleanup grants. They were able to divide this site up into multiple parcels, including the Taylor Yard parcel, and apply for the cleanup grant to get funding to remove the contaminations that were present on the site. And those projects are all currently underway. So this is like the main cleanup grant that EPA is providing for this portion of the LA River. And then EPA has also contributed a targeted brownfields assessment. So you heard that mentioned earlier, otherwise known as the TBA project or program. And so the Taylor Yard parcel is 42 acres of the 100 acres of LA River that's being restored. And this parcel, the Taylor Yard parcel kind of sits in the middle of two other parcels. The one on one side is the MRCA owns that land. On the other side is the state parks. And the state parks is partnering with the Nature Conservancy to redevelop for the ecosystem restoration and protection. So on their behalf, we did a targeted brownfields assessment on this bow tie parcel. And so we had EPA's contractors come out and do environmental site assessments, just taking a look at what contaminants were there, how much of the contaminants were present, just get a good idea of what to do next with that site. So that's kind of where we did the TBA program. Also on the same project, the EPA has helped with a land revitalization technical assistance. And for this, EPA has done a workforce analysis to sort of develop some data that can be used as part of their equity plan to address displacement and gentrification around the LA River. So this little map here is just a piece of a map. It's not the entire thing, but it's just kind of comparing some of the economic situations nearby. And that was part of the workforce analysis, where you can take a look at lots of different factors like economics, unemployment level, the races and ethnicities in the area, and kind of just help you to develop that data that would be used for an equitable development plan. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about a targeted site investigation. This was done by the state of California, so it's not under EPA, but it's also known as a TSI. And it's very similar to the targeted brownfields assessment. And this was done around sort of the same time that we started the cleanup grants. And this was just to do some more investigation on the site conditions that were at Taylor Yard. And lastly, I just wanted to talk about that they were involved with the Department of Toxic and Substance Control, DTSC, throughout this entire process. So especially when you're doing a cleanup, you need a state regulatory oversight agency, and that is what DTSC was providing for this project.
Great, thank you, Brooklyn. Great, yeah, so I don't see any more you know, ideas to share in the chat or any raised hands. I know it's not a lot of time to take and to come up with a case study or a success, or maybe everyone's really shy today. I totally understand. But we are, I think, at the end of our webinar today.
I'll talk if
Um,
I'm permitted.
yeah, absolutely.
I
Please.
just got off a train. Couldn't talk to you earlier. Uh, I've been on a couple of your webinars. I'm relatively unfamiliar with organizations. I think I know that you're not involved in the kinds of things I'd like to see you involved with, and that's occupied land, occupied by out of date business models that essentially are a blight on the community and aren't economically contributing to the community as they could be. Do you guys ever get involved in renewing land that's got a use now that could be improved and have a better use?
So Devin, I can respond to that. So hi, Bill, thank you for your question. This is Noemi Emmerich-Ford. I work for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And from a federal perspective, what I'll say is we don't get involved in local land use decisions. So for us, we provide funding to ensure that if there are environmental issues there, to one, determine whether environmental issues are there. And then if there are, to help the community get that area cleaned up so that the property can be used to its highest ability based on what the local government sees fit. So in terms of occupied land, that wouldn't necessarily be something EPA would push. We would provide funding if the land were occupied, if there was a need for environmental assessments to be done to determine if contamination existed, but we wouldn't push for a higher end use because that's really up to the local government to do that.
All righty, thanks a lot.
All right, if we don't have any more questions or comments, I think that we can close out our webinar today. Thank you so much to our speakers for joining us. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing with our audience. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Please, reach out to me with any more questions or comments. Our speaker information will be sent out on the slides, and the recording will be available. And also, please don't forget to schedule a one-on-one meeting through Calendly with the Vacant to Vibrant team. We would absolutely love to hear from you.